A number of our speakers have talked that regulatory challenges could be just as much of an impediment to a clean energy future as technology, as cost. So here to talk about those regulatory challenges is Ken Sheehan. Ken is the chair of Genova Burns Energy Practice. He brings significant expertise in both the public and private sectors with a broad and deep knowledge of the legal and policy foundations of both the regulated utility industry as well as the green energy economy. Ken.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Ray, for the introduction, both what you said and what you didn't. Always appreciate that. I'd like to thank Michelle Sokirk and the team for putting this program together and for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. As an initial matter, again, my name is Ken Sheehan, and the good news is I am not here to take away your gas cooking range. Those of you who have been around in New Jersey for a while have heard that. It seems to be the standard opening statement in any of these discussions. I remember President Fiordaliso saying it on any number of occasions, and I think I'd probably throw $5 down to say that the new president might mention something about it when she speaks in about 10 minutes, of which means I am well aware of the 45 minutes and the 72 slides I had may need to be cut down. I understand that. So with that in mind, let's jump straight into it. We've heard some really interesting and really intelligent speakers today talk about what. I'm just a state attorney. I worked for the state for probably 15, 20 years, and I still think that way. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the how. What are we going to worry about? What are the concerns? We're talking about, I'm not necessarily concerned what technology we use. How are we going to do it? What are we going to do with these regs? What are we going to do with this process? Those of you who have been here in the state, dealt with this process, are probably aware of it. But I think one way to look at the regulatory issues that will impact whatever decarbonization looks like in the state will be to consider three interconnected circles. There's consumer behavior, there's technology, and there's regulation. And not one of those controls. All three of them interact with each other. We've seen it. One example is to talk about the car discussion earlier today. If the regulations get too far out in front of the consumer behavior, you're going to have way too many cars on a lot and nobody buying them. So you need to have that balance. Not one of those three issues dominates. That being said, I do feel most qualified to talk about the regulatory side of the process. Now I'll admit, there are elements of me that are a little bit of an old school Reagan Republican, and I guess maybe a better description is an old school Chris Christie Republican, where, you know what, regulation should be minimal, but it needs to happen. So I believe that the regulation should be what you need to protect, promote, and advise. But you want to have the flexibility there to respond to changes in technology, policy, and consumer demands. I'd rather see recommendations in broad strokes to allow the industry to fill in the gaps as we go than a highly restrictive regulatory scheme. But I think we accept, and I think we've heard, and I think we've seen that nothing may happen without some regulatory push. And without that, somebody has to go first. So in this case, regulation may be the place to do it as long as we consider the technology and the consumer demand and the consumer reaction and action as we go forward in that process. Now, I no longer work for the state, so I can't get in trouble for saying this, but probably the biggest regulatory obstacle to decarbonization is the regulatory process. The lawyer in me can't help but talk about Metro Media. It's a decision from the New Jersey Supreme Court from 1984, which basically says agencies can't just make pronouncements. If it's something that's going to have broad impact, not exactly what the law said, it adds anew or changes where a agency is going, well, then you have to go through a rulemaking process. Okay, that's lovely. There is a problem. Rulemakings are designed to be quick and responsive and be able to allow an agency to move quickly. Quickly is a year. Quickly is a year if things go well. Under a best case circumstance in New Jersey, a regulation is going to take you 9 months, 12 steps, multiple rounds of stakeholder meetings, multiple rounds of publication, and that assumes at the end of the day what was promoted and adopted did not change in the slightest based upon the impact of the ratepayers, sorry, my old BPU hat, the impact of the stakeholders becoming involved in the process. So with that in mind, I want to recommend to each of you as you move forward and push for this and engage with the state and engage with the process to continue to think about the ways in which that regulatory process is going to impact where you go and how you get there. When you talk to state agencies, when you talk to state officials, when you are engaged in these stakeholder processes, think about the ways in which this regulatory activity, this regulatory process is going to impact what you're doing, what you want, and what you want to accomplish. Now, one of the problems with a regulatory approach is that it locks certain things in. You know, you're going to lock in, if you're not careful, technology. You want to balance that ability to say what type of technologies can be used, but you also want that ability for when that, you know, that teenage boy or teenage girl in their garage who invents a battery out of sand suddenly takes the entire industry and turns it on top of its head. The last thing we want to do is New Jersey be 12 to 18 months behind before we can start to implement that process. We have seen that. In New Jersey at the board, we saw it with the first round of smart meters. The state went ahead and told a utility to go ahead and install smart meters, and those meters were basically obsolete 2 to 3 years later. We'll mention it briefly, but at that point, we're talking about something called stranded costs. At that point, you've allowed a utility to go ahead and spend money with an expectation that they will have a period of time to recover that money, and suddenly it's no longer a used and useful item that they're theoretically incapable of recovering on. With the gas utilities, some of the regulatory obstacles we're going to see is you're going to, based upon who you believe today, we may need to expand the national gas transportation and distribution system, at least in the short term. Again, stranded costs. That infrastructure is designed to last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And if we're looking at that for 5 years or 10 years, you've got what we often refer to as the regulatory compact. That is an understanding between regulated entities and the state that in exchange for being subject to regulation that you wouldn't be if you were an ordinary corporation, you have a extended ability to have the opportunity to earn a rate of return on your investment. There is a requirement, there is an obligation, there may even be a constitutional requirement to allow those utilities to go ahead and recover those costs for things that we as a state or as individuals tell them they need to do. So that is going to be the type of thing that we need to be worried about. We need to be paying attention to the fact that these utilities are multi-state organizations. They have both an internal and external need to compete for capital and where it's going to be used. So with that in mind, you're looking at situations where you need to present a world where these utilities can continue to operate, but also while moving down the road to the decarbonization that we're looking at in whatever method that process is going to turn out to be. If we're going to do away with natural gas companies, big if, but if we are, we got to give them a heads up. We got to let them have the ability to process this and be ready to work their way through what they need, make sure that they receive fair treatment, make sure they continue to provide cooking gas if that is truly one of the things we're going to continue to provide in the state. One thing that we need to keep in mind is you need to make it easy to allow for the switching of fuel sources. A quick story, when I first started at the BPU 15, 20 years ago, the first board meeting I ever attended was a group of individuals who were coming up asking the board to allow natural gas to be put into their homes because their all-electric heating was much too expensive, built during the too cheap to meter era of nuclear power when it originally came around. Today, the board would deny it, but for completely different reasons today. So allow that ability for entities to go ahead and make the switch, make the change as they need to and as appropriate. Very quickly. The state has made it clear that low and moderate income equity and inclusion are significant, important, and must be included in any consideration as you move forward. The DEP environmental justice regulations are essentially in place. They have created a situation where the stakeholder process requires many more stakeholders, much more process, much more engagement. No matter what the answer is, moving forward, please do remember the need and requirement to engage early, engage often, be ready to go, and be ready to deal with what you receive in a real, rational manner. Tariffs. Tariffs are law. You know, when you're dealing with a PSE&G or a South Jersey Gas, that tariff is not a suggestion. The tariff is not a price list. Tariff is essentially the law. It is how the utility engages with its customer. We're going to need to develop brand new tariffs moving forward as this decarbonization process continues in the state. Assuming that decarbonization means electrification. It doesn't necessarily, but at the moment it looks at least like it's aiming that way in the state of New Jersey. We're going to need to consider how to make changes to the tariffs that include things like time of day. We need to be signaling to customers what the electricity costs, when and where, and to ensure that they are able to go ahead and move that forward and make decisions. If we're going to make it an all-electric house, you need to know, should you be charging your Tesla at 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning? And there needs to be value in that information. On the gas side, as long as we're continuing to allow gas companies to continue to work and operate, you're going to have to consider how to keep them profitable and operational. One option that we've seen is the idea of revenue decoupling. Traditionally, a utility makes money by selling its commodity. It makes more money by selling more of it. Once you've told a South Jersey Gas that they need to be selling less gas, well, you've told them they need to sell less gas, but somehow they still need to make a profit. So these are the types of things that we should be thinking about as we do this, and as all of us do this. Now, admittedly, I'm coming at this from a state attorney mindset, even though I'm now in private practice, but all of us are going to stumble across these things, and it's going to be some of these elements that you may not have thought about or that you might think are going to be somebody else's issues that may be the kind of driving force to help get us to a resolution. I would add probably the other major regulatory obstacle is this is a major project. I think that's an understatement. But New Jersey is not an island. New York, Pennsylvania, PJM, the federal government, all of these entities are going to have thoughts, considerations. Some of them have regulations. Some of them have the ability to affect what we choose to do and how we choose to do it. We have seen, if you make business too hard in New Jersey, business will leave New Jersey. So you need to balance getting these things done with making sure this remains an environment that is acceptable and conducive to good corporate behavior and the ability to create and continue to grow those corporations in light of the regulations that they may see. Are any of these insurmountable? Absolutely not. Most of these issues would be faced by the state under any major, across the board, across the agency, multi-year process such as we're taking right here. But this is a case where going into it with eyes open and awareness that these are known issues prepares all of us, the state, stakeholders, business owners, residents, even us lawyers, for what is always the most interesting part of any of these processes, the unknown issues that happen as we move forward. So with that, I have worked for enough presidents of the BPU to know that you don't keep presidents waiting when they have a time to come and speak. So I thank you for your time. I would be delighted to answer any questions if anyone has them. I'm going to be around in the back if you need me. But I want to thank NJBIA for what I think has been a very strong and spectacular session today. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to come speak. And I look forward to continuing this regulatory process with all of you. Thank you.